go ahead and I'll fiddle with this.
So I'm Lucah. Yes, Richard is my dad. He's great. And I was actually in this program, just as Jean said, in equity studies. I come from an academic family, so both my parents are professors. My sister and brother also PhDs. So I was kind of a little bit outside of that, and I really wanted to continue to pursue filmmaking, something I was really passionate about. It was in this education opened my mind to so many different ideas. Different ways that I perceive the world, and I didn't know I had so many, stereotypes, I guess, for lack of a better word, but just a lack of understanding because of the way that our education system has been, throughout high school and everything. So it was really mind-opening even for me. And I say even for me because obviously I'm going to present this film. It's called Passing, and it's about gender, particularly transition. From female to male, and especially from the perspective of being a person of color. So yeah, I transitioned about 8 years ago. When I started U of T, I was already male. I was already, had M on my documents and everything like that. And so basically, a lot of my education I spent, sitting in this classroom as a male person. That experience, more than just the transition, was pretty profound. Just being male in the world. I thought that most of the pains of my transition were going to come from the medical. It was going to come from, having to deal with pronouns and family and all of that stuff. Yes, that was really difficult for so many reasons, but by far, coming back into a world as a passing man, in a world that is still so binary, that treats men and women so differently, was by far more challenging. So when I decided to make Passing, it really stemmed from that place. I was working at a job at the time, and I wanted to live as stealth. When I told my parents I was going to transition, I said, I'm going to live stealth. I'm not going to tell anyone about this. I'm just going to go right back into cult society and just live as a male person. Way more challenging. Masculine culture just really dominated me in a way I was not prepared for, and I really felt like I wasn't doing enough to talk about it from this vantage point, because it is such a unique vantage point that really only from a passing perspective do you really see the pros of it and also the violence that can be caused by it. So this film is a reflection of that. It's profiling me and a couple of other gentlemen, particularly with the intersection of also being a black male as well. And I hope you enjoy it, and after that I'll talk a little bit more about myself.
Really, the only way as a culture that we're going to get to any level of acceptance of others is by you choosing to accept me right now. Live by the way that show.
Thank you for that screening. I'd like to. I'm going to say a few things, but in general, my favorite part of anything like this is by far the Q&A. I rarely get an opportunity to speak to a group of this level of education about these sorts of issues, so I'm actually really excited about that. So if you do have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. You got one? Okay, perfect. All right, I'll speak for like 5, and then I'll come to it at the end. So just a little brief about putting this project together. Basically, I decided that I really was going to pursue, obviously, this film. Finding people to be in it was one of the hardest things, because most people, especially at this time, and this was a few years ago now, didn't want to come out on this level, especially being people of color. So there was a lot of, humming and froing about whether or not. I ended up writing this big document about why it's really important that this is the time, and actually the day we left to go film this as the crew was the day that Laverne Cox was on the cover of Time magazine, and we knew we were on the right track. So after this, it's obviously toured, and I've been able to show it to people. My main purpose with it, and obviously with the concept of passing, was coming from this deep place of actual invisibility. When I told people that I was going to transition, a lot of people said, "Oh, your life's going to be over. You're adding more things to this list that is already an issue." At the time, I was female, I was a person of color, I was dating a woman, so obviously I was experiencing that. I was adopted, and I was Jewish. So people were like, "What are you doing?" And so by the time I did this, I actually realized that the transition has almost made me completely invisible, completely. And in so many ways that I didn't expect. Some of them are great. When we're talking about male privilege and everything like that, I definitely benefit from that, and I use it, at times, either to call people out when I feel like they're not going to experience a man mentioning certain things, or to, just, change masculinity in general. And sometimes I use it, obviously, for the things that I just want. Obviously all that stuff. But, in general, it's actually made me much less accepted in many situations. Yes, masculinity-wise, 100%. But in terms of being a person of color, I was never stopped by the police until I was read as male and had a male ID. I never worried about violence. As a female, I had other concerns. I did worry about assault and all of those types of things that women definitely worry about in our culture. But as a man, I thought, oh, it'll go away. But actually, I found that now I opened myself up to a whole other type of violence, which I wasn't necessarily prepared for, that I've kind of had to learn with. There have been times where, there's one time I was on Queen Street. I lived there, which is where I was when I shot this. I'm walking, it's late, I'm single, by myself, looking at, well, what do I want to eat, la la la. And there's this white couple in front of me. And, the guy actually turns around and says, I'm sorry, but can you pass us? She just wants, can you pass us, basically? And it took me a minute to realize, kind of what that interaction had gone down as. One, he threw her under the bus, so I was kind of all right. But then I realized, wow, they actually thought I was just too close to them while black. And that was a different thing that I hadn't really experienced before. And those things come up, time and it happens still, but it's been years now, so I'm more used to that. But even with queer community, with LGBT, if I go into a space, I've got a female partner, we're the straight people there. We're at Pride. They're like, who are these guys? And it's made that an interesting experience for me, because I thought that, hey, I'm trans, I'm going to be really accepted back into this thing. I'll be accepted by all these different types of people. And it's really, I've lost that connection. I mean, transition's great, it was the right decision for me, but if we're talking about intersectionality here, I've lost that connection about what it means to look at a couple, an LGBT couple, and look at them and have that vibe. Well, I'm sure some of you know what I'm talking about here, and now it's like who's this guy looking at us? And so that's been a lot to digest, and I think as a society, as a culture, the only way we're really going to push through this is the same way we pushed through when everyone thought that being gay was you had to wear a boa. They're like, you're gay, but you play sports and you do all this stuff and you don't wear dresses, and how people back in the 80s. Now we're still in a place of transition where we think trans looks a certain way. Until we get past that, until we recognize that, we can't always peg trans people, and it's a spectrum. There's so many of us, and we look all kinds of ways. Anyone could be trans that you're talking to in certain situations, anyone that you could go on a date with or have an interaction with, and we need to really up our education level in that sense and start thinking a bit outside the box. So I'll leave it at that, because I really want to hear what you guys have to say, and I'll start right here.
Do you feel like you are now able to express your true self in the highest way possible after your transition?
Oh yeah, 100%.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh yes, yes. Do I feel like I'm able to more express my true self after transition at the highest way possible? 100%. I think that being able to obviously not just make films. This was my first film. I made another film last year. Just showed in TIFF in September. Run a business in digital marketing, and I love it. So in that way, it's freed me in a really profound way to do what I love in a way that a lot of trans people, I think, still feel like they can't work, they can't follow their dreams, they can't do this because there are no role models. What I would hope to do with myself and my life is to show people through history and time that there is possibility there, and you shouldn't let transition hold you back. Yes, the question was, does my experience ever get erased talking about this because of the passing concept, right? Yeah, I think that it does in some ways, but I think I benefit on two counts. One, the fact that I'm male. There's a lot, because sometimes people ask, how did your parents act, or how did your friends act, and those things. There's a huge difference between transition to male and female, because when you transition to male, because of sexism, people are like, there's this underlying thing, oh, male, yeah, of course you want to be a man. Being a man is the best. So you have that kind of people, there's a subconscious part of people that feel that way. As opposed to when you transition to female, it's like, why would you do that? Why would you voluntarily do that? And I think as like a culture, we still struggle with those things. So when I talk about my experience, I think mostly people are kind of, there's a shock factor. It's kind of sometimes I feel like I'm doing a magic trick, and people are like, oh, in their eyes. But I think in general, it does get erased in some way, but I hope that by talking about it publicly, I can really bring a voice to it in a way that a lot of people are still living stealth. And so in terms of the family and friends thing, for sure. Actually, the girlfriend that I originally transitioned with, my female friends started to treat me, more male. There was kind of that vibe there that develops. Then you have to get into all these conversations. And even on a family level though, like I have a brother and a sister, there was that actual, moment where if we all got together, like I'm on the bed with my brother, not my sister anymore. We don't go to do those same things. I can't just walk into the room when my mom's there. I have to knock and do those types of things. And that was, I think no one was really prepared for that, but it's so almost this natural thing that happens. Even if people are like, oh, we're really open-minded and it's all good, you were female before, there's definitely that divide. The mother-son relationship and my father-son relationship have shifted. I would say for the better though. We're a lot closer, just because I'm a happier person. But, in general, we're closer. So, but it is true. All those subtle things I recognize even to this day. Yes?
Now that you have transitioned to male, do you feel the need to announce your transness at LGBT plus, events? Because you almost feel as if you're not welcome anymore. Do you feel the need to wear a shirt like, I'm still trans?
I have 3 of those. Yeah. Like, actually...
Right here?
Yeah. So do I feel a need to announce myself in LGBT spaces and have shirts? And that's what I'm saying. I do. It is so. And the longer I have transitioned, the more intense it has been for me. My desire to be out is like I never thought it would be so extreme. And I have shirts and everything, and I say to my friends all the time, like, I just want people to know because because again, like. Especially in the LGBT spaces. The straight spaces, not so much, because you just don't want that to be the big topic of conversation. But at Pride, always, I look for that sticker every year. I'm getting that sticker, and I always get a look too. Yeah. Like, do you have any trans stickers? And they're like, even this guy knows. Like, at Pride, I always get people giving me a little bit of flack about it too. They don't believe me when I wear it. And they'll come up and be like, that's not okay. You can't wear this. I'm telling you guys, But that is, I guess, where the burden of passing does come into play. And I do pursue coming out in my life. The cover of the Star on Pride Week, I was on the cover of the Star on Pride Week, trans out everything, hardly made any difference in my life. Like, it's not like more people kind of knew, but I think over time, my hope is that, yeah, it would be great if everybody knew. I think it would save me a lot of just feelings in general. Yeah.
So now that you've transitioned, this is kind of a loaded question, but like, what do you think defines you as a male? Like, what about you has changed the way that you consider a male person?
What about me has defines me as male and what's changed? Again, yeah, another good one. I remember this moment when I was working at the Apple store for like 3 years. It raised me as a man 100% because I was totally stealth while I was there. And a lot of different types of guys, gay guys, straight guys, I was engaging with kind of people, plus staff and customers. And guys would kind of come up and just start engaging with me about the women there. They would just come up, stand beside me and be like, dude, look at that girl. Like, wow. Like, start talking very, very, what's the word? Like, just so explicit about the situation. And then even one time, it's really funny, like one time the security guard came up and was like, dude, you gotta come to my birthday party, but like, don't worry, it's not gonna be a sausage fest. Like, he actually said that to me. And that's when I started to think about like, okay, what kind of guy am I? Like, am I the type of guy that thinks that that's okay? Or am I the type of guy that's gonna be like, I'm not down and I'm not gonna go? And I didn't go to that party. And that was because I was just like, that was weird, and I was like, your friends, whatever, right? So, like, that was kind of those moments where I thought, okay, I'm really gonna have to make some decisions here. And so some of the things that define me, I would say as a man right now are, like, I'm pretty big on compassion and empathy, I think, in a way that I've tried to carry on from my female experience. And I do try to bring that into life. The weird part about that, though, I would say, is a lot of the world is not really into that. They're not really that open to it. And I think we still have a long way to go in terms of how people perceive masculine or male emotions just in general. But I would say for me, yeah, like being creative, being compassionate, being communicative are all really big parts of, for me, masculinity.
So the example you just gave of your experience working at the Apple store brought up a lot of insight into hegemonic masculinity and the role of misogyny and heteronormativity in that structure. And so how do you negotiate trying to participate in dominant male culture while also trying to be an ally in other areas and confront heteronormativity and misogyny, for example?
That's great. So it's, how did I deal with confronting that masculinity, and how do I deal with it now? The way I confront the masculinity is, one, it took me a long time. I would say years to even be comfortable to speak up against it. Against certain things that I heard, whether that was homophobic, transphobic, anything. For a while, I kept myself shut, and this is partly why I am out now, is because I realized it didn't feel right to be so silent about it when you hear so many things. So part of it for me was, one, coming out, so to kind of change that perception of what trans is, and two, to call it out when I see it, but when it's safe. I don't always do it. If I'm in a situation and a visibly trans woman walks in and the guy says like, oh, that's so weird, I can't believe that, and that's happened to me many times. The question I ask myself is, how do I stand up for it? Do I stand up and say, hey, I'm trans, that offends me? Or do I just stand up with it as a passing male? And a lot of the time in that situation, I just stand up for it. Because there's not a single part of their brain that's like, this guy's trans, when I do that, right? Like, as opposed to if I said that was homophobic, you want to be like, maybe this guy's gay. But when you stand up for trans, people don't think that, right, about you, because we're still in this way of thinking about transition. So that is a huge thing that I do is try to call it out when I see it. And the last thing I'll say about that is, I like being a little bit sometimes, I'll say the term outside the box again, but if a girl comes in with a manicure or something, I'll be like, oh, is that gel tip or shellac? Like, I'll actually say that in front of guys, and they're like, wow, this guy's really comfortable with himself, obviously, or something, because they think of that, they don't think of engaging in anything feminine as something they want to do as men. And so for me, pushing back against that and saying, I don't care. Like, I don't care that I have Britney Spears on my iPod. I don't care, but it wasn't a transition in and of itself. I remember a couple of years in, I wanted to put a photo of Lana Del Rey up on my cover photo on Facebook. It's a great photo. And I was physically afraid. And that's when I realized that, wow, this whole masculinity thing is way more intense than I thought it would ever be, because I feel afraid to do this. And I would never think that that would be the case, right? So I think it's just feeling the fear and doing it anyway. For me. Do we still have a second or one more? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. I'll stick around absolutely. I'm gonna do one more here before stand up there.
How do you react when other people say sexually explicit things about other women to you? Do you find yourself conforming and not saying things, or do you afraid to like that mom should say that?
So how do I feel when people say sexually explicit things about women? I'll go the full honesty route here. I don't always say anything. And sometimes I do if we're friends and I want to have a relationship with this person, I will 100% consistently make comments, call it out. But if it's just kind of a person and it's over, or from that film, if I'm in the line, sometimes, like I've been in Starbucks where a guy will say, well, yeah, of course it's slow, like it's a woman behind the thing, and they want me to agree. The funny part is they're not even saying it like they're saying it literally to bond with me, because that's how they think it's gonna work, and they're like, oh, this black guy's totally gonna agree, and he's probably sexist like me, and all that. And then I'm just like, no, I'm not. So when that happens, I just have to nod and say, sometimes I do have to agree. And it's not that I have to, but you don't always have the energy to not agree, and sometimes you just are like, you don't want to even take the time to, it would be too long a situation, right? As I'm sure you know. But I do try and help the world by calling it out when I can.
Okay, so first of all, Lucah has said that he will stay around a little bit. So some of you have questions that you didn't get to ask, and some of you might be more comfortable talking to Lucah in person. So he's free to stay around.
And I'm gonna put I don't know about maybe an Instagram up if you guys wanna message him.
Oh,